29 days and counting. Good morning, Trumptopia! A special segment of the almost daily Zencast. Hosted by yours truly, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. It is Tuesday, December 22nd, 2020. Hello and namaste, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Our opening track today from DJ Zed's fictional album Collab Nation, a remix live loop-de-loop 101 remix of La Phase. Welcome to your rabbit hole. Greetings and salutations, dear audience and internet fam. Another day, another segment, another look at what's going on, or appears to be going on, or at least is being reported as going on. Welcome to the show. If you're new, I extend to you my humblest thanks and greetings. A programming note, the show is not intended necessarily to be listened to in any particular order. It does have a sort of current events thing going on with it, so you'll see in titles of the show that there seems to be a connection to specific events from specific time frames. But I also go out of my way to sort of spiral in and out in as tidy a way as possible. The sort of larger perspective from which I'm addressing the nexus of our current events and the probability waveform functions of tomorrow. Stay tuned for an interesting today's nugget of Zen. I'm excited about that. I'm going to try and do it in the new multiplex fractal discourse format. If you don't know what I mean by that, don't worry. The pilot and this today's nugget of Zen in this new wackadoo format should drop sometime in the next 42 hours. Let's just call it sometime this week. Hopefully. Knock on wood. Okay, so Trumptopia. What's up? It's officially winter. It's the first day of winter. It was yesterday, day 30. 30 days out from January 20th. Today is 29. Fun localized side note, sunny Southern California, in, I think, although if I'm wrong, I apologize to you, might be record-breaking all-time high temperatures for a first day of Christmas. First day of winter. Although I guess some people might call that the first day of Christmas. If there are, is it 12 days? I don't know. Yeah, but we're in the generally like high 70s, mid 80s out here. I think we hit 85 somewhere in Southern California. 83 for certain in multiple places. I don't know about you, but that's pretty warm, even for Southern California, in the middle of December. Although we do have weird, funky... Southern California weather is its own bizarre thing. But yeah, I just thought... it might not actually be record-breaking. I should have thought ahead and looked up the record-breaking all-time high temperatures for today and seen what they were and how close we are to them. But I digress. Either way, even if it's not quite record-breaking, it's kind of weird and interesting. And of course, you know, anyone over there on the denier's side of this and or most other given wedge issues will deny it. But the warmer winter gets, the more I am inclined to say, oh, maybe that climate change stuff is something we should be concerned about. But I digress. To recap what's been going on in the approximately 7 weeks since the 2020 election was officially held and tabulated, or at least the tabulation was begun, because election day is really more of a cloud of days in terms of the actual operations performed by civic volunteers. And I've rambled about various points of view about that, or at least my perspective on various points of view about that. But I digress. In this interim lame duck session, as sort of kind of almost predicted, or easily predicted, none of this was too way outside of what was already like, oh geez, is this guy swatting, at these objectives in this general direction? But Trump has tried to pressure Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and I think one other swing state, and jumped on the bandwagon with Texas, which is a whole separate thing, to reject the popular vote and install faithless electors. He has tried to bring, he and or his administration and or his supporters have tried to bring two different cases to the Supreme Court, both of which were out and out rejected. All states in question have recounted and recertified the popular vote and have officially, according to bipartisan election officials, declared the win for Biden. And yet Trump continues to use Twitter as his sort of bully pulpit, his presidential bully pulpit. Can we pause and put a pin in that? In as much as that we really need to remember as we move forward into some bold new blue tyranny, that perhaps we need to make it, if not a socially normalized and acceptable norm, maybe we should even consider codifying it. That, I don't know, I think that politicians shouldn't have personal Twitter and Instagram and Facebook accounts. Like, they shouldn't be allowed to obsessively, compulsively just post whatever nonsense they want. They are public servants. They are being luxuriously paid out of the collective tax dollars collected from all those who pay in, citizens and otherwise, because non-citizens pay into the tax system. That's just a plain old simple fact. And I don't know. Maybe this is just a president thing. Like, maybe just the people in the White House Because, and here's why, here's my concern, if I may just address this. It's been a concern throughout. I don't know how specifically I've addressed it. I know I've made a few offhand comments about this idea in general throughout, here and on other social media platforms. But it is absurd that Trump says things on Twitter and the rest of government takes action, as if it were something done through more formal, official presidential channels. I think that shouldn't be allowed. Like, the presidential Twitter account should be about, official presidential portraits with guests and pictures of the dog and a little bit of like the public events that, it should be a little bit of self-reporting, not a platform for ideological decrees and or dogmatic declarations and or threats of violence and or threats of, what's the most recent thing he's been musing? I don't know for a fact if he's posted this on Twitter, but I've heard it referenced that he has. That could be an exaggeration or a misrepresentation. I tend to not want to go spend a lot of time on the official Twitter account of Donald J. Trump, nor do I care to spend a lot of time on the official White House Twitter and or other social media accounts. Mostly because, well, there's a lot of reasons there, and I don't want to make this discussion about that. Let's just say I have my reasons. I will occasionally go, especially when claims are made that I'm like, wait, if anything, if there's like it has happened that like Trump tweets, supposedly official Trump tweets, that maybe were satirical originally, or at some level of development considered satirical, or some sort of artistic license. They've come out, and I'm like, I don't think he would have actually said that. I've thought to myself, theoretically, based on my, admittedly not as comprehensive as others might be, but based on my understanding of Trump and how he tends to write when you know for sure it's him writing it, and the way he tends to speak. And, I've gone to go look because of certain, and I don't have screenshots of this, and if there was a better way to search your own comments on other people's pages, but I guess that presents some sort of privacy issue. I'm not really sure why we can't do that. I'd love to pull all of the comments I've ever made anywhere else, even if it's sort of without context, and just be able to extrapolate them all and down, because they're things I typed, not to go off on that tangent. I've gone and checked, and like, he never posted anything like that, or if he did, it's been deleted. In which I've then lost track of the issue and not paid attention to whether or not it got resolved. But I think moving forward, and I hope that perhaps the Biden-Harris administration, while they want to be social media and multimedia savvy, and that's a good thing, if we're going to fix the problems that have been created through politics, we just have to make mindful choices and build consensus that isn't driven by wedge ideology, but rather by actual, fair, open discourse about what's best for the greatest good. And I don't think that the world jumping and sort of living in either a zealotous, to conjugate poorly, in a sort of zealotry mode of foaming at the mouth and, going wild in support of everything he tweets, while not critically analyzing the inconsistencies, historically speaking. Because, if you look, people have pointed out, there is a perfect, mirror opposite tweet from Obama-era Trump tweets for almost every issue that he's enraged people with while in office. And it's ridiculous. And his base just ignores them or bends over backwards to rationalize how it's fine that he's evolved in the direction that he's evolved his opinion in. Mind you, I'm not a tyrannical opinion Nazi. People are allowed to have opinions, express them publicly. I endorse fair, open, non-emotionally, intellectually, or physically violent public discourse. Peaceful public discourse, civic organization, and genuine, authentically healing spiritual practice, as opposed to all the other shenanigans we participate in. At any rate, the last 7 weeks have been epic. So many other things have happened, not the least of which is, a renewed passion and enthusiasm for one side of the duopoly screaming, Russia, 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 and the other side screaming, China, 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 and or Turkey and or Iran. Like, everybody's got their favorite bad guy. And, of course, the world is what the world is, and, things are going on. But here, behind the orange curtain, I think the most interesting thing that we're going to turn to and talk about in the main thrust of this episode is how, from my perspective, it appears that there are schisms, wide schisms forming in the upper echelon of the Trump camp. I think. I could be wrong. It might be some sort of distractionary measures. I don't know. I'm sure the Trump base has all kinds of theories and or rationalizations and or other things that they're pointing to or preoccupied with, as is their, general sort of sidestepping maneuvering tends to be, especially if they're QAnon types. But we'll see. I haven't been paying attention to that sort of demographic for a minute. Not out of disrespect. I respect everybody's opinion. I just get exhausted when it's like, we're just sort of repeating ourselves, and you keep saying that eventually one day Clinton will get locked up and Trump will stay in power, when all things point to exactly not that happening. They have their own really interesting and at times persuasive argument for why they believe what they believe. But what's interesting is that there's various arguments. And as I was beginning to point out, what's slightly more significant in terms of how things actually play out is that the people in Trump's own actual circles of what's a polite phrase? Of consultants and associates and a trusted, whatever they are, family and friends and associates, etc. There seems to be schisms growing. But we'll dive into that in a hot second. Let's take a palate-refreshing audio break with a little bit of DJ Zed's End Times, a late-night retroism created on Remix Live using the Retrowave bag. And we return to the most interesting of Trumptopian developments. It appears to me and again, this is just my opinion, and my perspective is limited. I am not in a position to be anywhere near the White House in terms of direct journalistic investigation. But wouldn't it be neat if I could be? Wouldn't it be neat if I was on a news team? Woo! But from what I can gather, it seems that some of Trump's own most faithful official confidants and supporters and members of the administration, directly or indirectly, at the upper echelons of his circles, seem to be disagreeing with one another and maybe even turning on each other over this newest, most recent flirtation with autocratic tendencies towards things that might be a little tyranny-ish, such as these recently reported meetings where apparently they seem to be discussing Michael Flynn's televised, wild, remarkable suggestion that Trump might implement martial law and force the American public to run a second election, have a new election, just throw out the first election, do it all over again. I can imagine that we are probably very, very near a parallel universe in which that literally has already happened. Which gives me hope, because that means in this universe, it's exponentially less likely that probability waveform function will foment, will come to be. If it's already solidly being expressed in another parallel universe, and then it has its own subset of variants that stem from it happening at all. And it's not happening here yet, but it's being sort of flirted with. We might luck out and dodge that bullet. In an infinite universe, though, all infinite probable possibilities are actually being expressed. So you never know until it's over, folks. If there has ever been a more heightened and interestingly, seemingly urgent 30 days to get through in American history and, Trumptopian history, it's these 30 days. It really is remarkable to me. It's, in a way, I guess, unprecedented to sort of get to apply that term in a counter intuitive way, because it's not the same way we've been using it so much lately in regards to Trump and his behavior. But William Barr, who has in his office seemed to have bent over backwards and tied himself into pretzels to do Trump's bidding publicly, on live television, and I'm sure behind closed doors, in the past on other issues, which he's, for those of you who think that's cool, he's not supposed to do that. That's not the relationship they're supposed to have in terms of the way those offices typically function. And in my humble opinion, it's a big no-no the way they've been carrying on, and they should not be able to just exit office one way or another and get away with it, especially through the issuance of presidential pardons. That's a bit nonsensical. And I hope that there are state provisions that can snag them in a fair and just way. May they be held accountable in some form or fashion. But I digress. It's remarkable that he's, after this, sort of otherwise unprecedented in the opposite direction career of being Trump's sort of legal pit bull dog, he has now, as of my understanding, twice publicly denied and debunked the validity of Trump's claim to widespread organized election fraud. And he's drawn a line, which is presumably driving Trump himself a bit up the wall. I would imagine. Meanwhile, Michael Flynn is keeping himself in the news quite mind-bogglingly with this whole pimping of the martial law idea to Trump through what must be admitted now are the clear and obvious ways that the more effective peddlers of ideas to Trump get into Trump's ear holes, which is by appearing on Trump's currently most favorite, right-wing media news sources and or the left-wing media. And that's just taking what's already been a Trump first in political shenanigans to a whole new level. And of course is the penultimate, that may or may not be the right word, but it's the most recent example of Trump's own sort of ridiculous flip-floppery and self-contradiction. I'm sure that at least one or two examples of Trump fear-mongering the idea or insinuating the notion that the tyrannical, evil left extremists ultimately want to implement martial law in order to take away your freedoms. And here he is, contemplating and apparently being sort of encouraged, almost shepherded, just herded. Kitty, he's a kitten herd, like a kitten being herded by a cat herder. He's being sort of led towards, encouraged towards actually maybe potentially doing it. Which is wild to me and outrageous. And while, yes, Flynn himself points out that the United States has implemented martial law some 60 plus odd times, that doesn't mean it's okay to do it now under these conditions for the reasons as stated, in my humble opinion. And there's a lot of questions that have been deflected and or blatantly ignored about Flynn by the right. Who was he working for when he first joined the Trump campaign back in the day? Right? And who was that country in bed with? And he pled guilty to that. It's not like he denied it and they railroaded him or something. They railroaded him. He pleaded guilty and struck deals and apparently facilitated the government in their investigations for a while until he didn't and or did whatever the heck most recent thing he's doing. This whole escapade has been astounding, and it is just compounded and made infinitely crazier, in my opinion, by this contrast. Like, consider this question: why is it that Trump continues to incompetently try to overturn the will of the American people by reversing the popular vote, which he clearly did not win, and he hadn't won the first time, but also simultaneously has not said one word about the very alarming cyber attack, international cyber attack, because it isn't. While most people pontificating about this on the news media seem to be focused on it happening here and the agencies involved and the corporations involved, to the best of my understanding, it impacted many countries I think the closest thing he said about it is that it probably isn't Russia, that it's probably China, which may or may not be a valid thing to investigate. It could be, obviously, multiple different actors doing multiple different things all at once and coming to a fruition in a weird coincidental or intentional confluence of cyber activity. But the pattern of behavior throughout for 4 years, culminating in this bizarre sort of half-assedly self-congratulatory dropping of the COVID-19 issue. Just kind of like, oh, Operation Warp Speed, yay! And then, whatever, I'm going to go golfing. Good luck. But make sure I get credit for Operation Warp Speed. Is, I think, finally sort of hitting enough people in the base and smacking of being just like every other politician, that they're getting, those who haven't yet had the aha moment, which I think might be a bit devastating and a bit painful and a bit traumatic and a bit truly, truly disappointing and or aggravating and infuriating, but a necessary moment. That aha moment of realizing, oh, Trump really is just sort of like a Trump politician. He's just doing what they clearly have always been doing, and being two-faced about it, and making promises and assurances that mean nothing and fly right out the window, etc., 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 etc. And this vaccine thing, this warp speed thing, is really pushing the anti-vaxxer demographic of his base to start to like edge out. And in a way, I'm really grateful for that. I celebrate it, and I also I remind everyone in the coalition of multiple mindsets that makes up the Trump resistance, la résistance. There's many different kinds of us, and we need to unite and rally around something. That we must prevent ourselves, regardless and or irregardless, whichever the right variant is, of our preferred political push, our agenda that needs to be incorporated into the Big Tent policy of the left, the leftist blue system, to not reuse tyranny. Setting all of that aside, because there's the right will accuse the left of having its own theoretical ideological civil war, as they are wont to do, because the two echo chambers indeed often kind of fall prey to their own divisive thinking and methodologies, right? But slowly but surely, as for various reasons, previously fanatical members of the Trump base come to their aha moment and start to choose to walk away, the rest of us, whether we, no matter what category we self-identify as, we need to unite in the gracious act of handling, facilitating their aha moment and transition away from Trump and Trumpism and Trump thinking, with grace and humility, a little bit of tough love and a sense of humor for sure, a little bit of like, you gotta hold yourself accountable. You supported that guy, and to unite, we all gotta like meet in the middle, make amends. What's all that in the Old Lang Syne song about, that we all sing on New Year's but don't really understand the meaning of? We got to bury hatchets and heal and forgive and unite around, supporting each other instead of, berating and abusing verbally and intellectually and sometimes violently on the streets each other over these. Ow, sorry guys. I'll try to catch that and edit it out in some future updrafting of this episode. But formally, an official apology to anyone and everyone throughout time and history that has ever listened to this or any other version of the podcast show in which there were crap sound levels or crazy noises or whatever. Slowly but surely, I'm trying to build my way towards a tighter, more professional presentation of the show. Thank you for indulging me in that. Okay, so having said all that, where do I think things stand, if I may be so bold, and transition to through the middle and towards the end of the show. Given the idea that I've highlighted before, that politics in many ways fails to be what we really should be achieving. I mean, it can be the same thing. It doesn't have to be a radical, like burn the system down and build from scratch kind of change. But what we have is a system of ideological jousting. What we need is an organizational network of getting civic activities done. There has to be better language than that, I'm sure. But we need civic organization. We need to be able to build homes. Not just for the elite end of the market that can afford luxury pads in different locations, but for everybody. We need to address the homelessness issue and the weird, mind-boggling fact that there's whatever fluctuating ratio of, exponentially more homes that are empty and not being utilized than there are actual homeless individuals. Even though we're adding to that, and that may, it's just that disparity is just going to get worse in a weird, toxic way as more and more people face, the threat of losing the roof over their heads. In America, the greatest, wealthiest nation in the world. Arguably, if there is a nefarious system that's pulling the strings, one of their, it would seem to me, obvious objectives that might be rampant through the core of everything that they do and put out and distribute would be to keep us arguing and fighting with each other over ridiculous ideological things that ultimately are designed to just keep us arguing and fighting with each other and not actually, and do not lend towards getting anything done. And as various people have reminded us in various phrasings, we must be the change. We have to reach out to and reach deep within, really, first. But we have to simultaneously we have to reach within and reach out to each other, and do a bit of abdicating of these wedge issues and conflict dramas, and get to a place where we can achieve civic organization, fix the problems. There are problems. And one of those problems is that hoax/denial culture, not the denial of hoaxes culture, although I'm sure there's some sort of push to create that sort of subset of culture too. But the whole everything's a hoax culture, everything must be denied culture, add cancel culture next to it as a sort of inverse opposite. That stuff, especially if it's applied in sort of absolutist, tribalist, us versus them kind of way, isn't helping. It's just sort of displacing the problem and making it more complex. Turning to the fact that this great government of Trumptopia has finally, apparently, although there's still a final kick, I have not heard news of Trump signing the newly negotiated, quote, and with dripping sarcasm, relief package, end quote. But presumably he will. Not a minute too soon. And a lot can be said about the process. A lot is being said about the process. The fact that it took this long for them to achieve anything. The most fascinating thing that I've heard discussed, and that I lean on one side of the what if question, is like, what if Trump had just led and delivered, a better support package for the American people before the election? Wouldn't that have helped his cause in trying to win it? Some are arguing that the way he handled coronavirus, which has many layers, right, many issues to it, is precisely what cost him the election. That there were enough people that were fringe members, let's make up a term, fringe members of his coalition, members of his coalition on the edges of like, I'm pinching my nose and putting up with it, but I have a last straw, and it's this. Now, there's counter arguments and all kinds of statements, and we can go around in a circle about it. But in terms of where my opinion is developing, is that probably is accurate, and that it's kind of intriguing, and it shouldn't just be left hanging in the wind, right? Like, what does it mean that Trump coulda, shoulda, woulda seen that, right? His advisors coulda, woulda, shoulda realized that a healthier, fatter, better, well-structured, well-executed, not shady as fuck, and not unfair AF, not to downgrade my language there. This show is explicit for the only silly reason that I like to say fuck sometimes, and other, quote-unquote explicit words. But anyways, if that cost him the election, there's just an interesting array of questions that come up. And I think many of them are kind of worth pursuing to gain a better understanding of what, if there is a plan, what it actually is. I guess you could call it giving him benefit of the doubt, but I've been mostly inclined to think, to lean towards the conclusion that he has no real plan, that he kind of just likes to lip service and bluff and flout that he has a plan, and is counting on, things going well in order to just scoop credit wherever he can. There are those, and I've looked at this, and there are, there's enough evidence to make it somewhat persuasive, to put it one way. But there are those positing and suggesting that maybe the plan was, all along, to cajole and confuse and divide and distract and sort of Pied Piperly lead his own base towards facilitating a deeper, wider, more virulent, more pervasive, and exponentially explosive expression of the viral, thing going viral here in the United States. Do I want to... Am I asserting that I think that's what happened? No. But wow, do some of these questions and these lines of questioning can lead a person towards wondering if. I've said it before. It's not the first time I flirted with it, right? Am I throwing wild, unfounded accusations? I hope not. I'm not trying to. I am questioning everything, and I am using my free speech right to ask, why didn't Operation Warp Speed, which arguably deserves some credit and wasn't a total disastrous, miserable failure, why didn't it go better? There's been some hiccups. There's been this weird, what's his name? I didn't catch his name, but he's a general, involved in Operation Warp Speed, and he kind of jumped on that landmine of like, sorry, he was the guy that said we're in charge of drawing up the logistics, but we're not actually deploying. That's going to be all, UPS and FedEx and etc. He had to come back a few days later and be like, he took personal responsibility for the weirdness and the dip in projected delivery and that kind of freaked people out in the industry, right? The frontline workers and all the depositories, all the locations that were expecting to receive vaccine doses went through this couple days of like, what's going on because of the weird messaging. It's a minor sidebar scandal, if you want to call it that. But Trump's administration, and I think this is the aha moment that's really hitting it, like it isn't a Trump delirium. Trump has really done scandalous things throughout. And he's gotten so egregious that even his own base is like, whoa, slow your roll, Donnie. Like, what's up with this? And it's sort of starting in the anti-vaxxer department, or the anti-vaxxer coalition, because they're a pretty diverse group themselves. Let's realize. Remember, one of the central tenets of my theory is nothing in the universe is as absolute as any theory might propose. Because there's a lot of abuse. There's a lot of abusive use, manipulative, misleading use of absolutist logic. And so, friends, where are we going? I don't know, but he's only got 29 days left. And given the history that has been lived through, the parameters of this universe's expression of Donald Trump under these contexts, in this particular universe, in the multiverse of infinite universes, his probability wave function, both individually and as the leader of a collective, seems to be unfolding towards a place where there's a movement away from members of his base, enough that whatever ambitions collectively and or personally might be going on in the Trump household, that we can bend that curve and over time sort of hopefully not experience a resurgence of the Trumpist movement in the next election cycle. But that's the thing to watch. And barring any really extreme and or unforeseeable events, choices, or actions from Trump himself, I mean, there's a range of things that are foreseeable but unlikely, right? And there's a range of things that are unlikely, but in the range of likeliness, like in their percentage of maybe happening, they're kind of unforeseeable. We don't know that he might do something crazy. He might run away to some country that doesn't have an extradition treaty. Just speculatively speaking, I'm not pretending to know something here. Just theoretically, right? Like Nixon could have done that because despite getting, was it 4 to pardon him, he mighta, coulda, woulda also been, had legal exposure at the state level in the same way that we're talking now, that Trump does indeed. Trump and most of the members of his cadre, of his cohort, of his administration, and the hangers on, the people in the sort of mid-level circles, they've opened up some legal exposure, as the terminology goes, some exposure to some legal exposure to criminal, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a criminal justice expert, right? To some legal exposure to criminal investigation and or to criminal charges, I guess is what I'm trying to say, which may not be technical jargon, but you get where I'm going, right? Like they haven't completely cleared that horizon in any way, shape, or form, despite any pretenses or imagining so by the base and or by their own self talk or self lip service. It's going to be an interesting 30 days. And I guess from my perspective, I encourage people who are of spiritual inclination to ground themselves in some prayer and meditation, because as you may remember, in my opinion, they are two sides of the same coin, two practices that facilitate the same work. And that you, to use some of my own theoretical language, that you vote for with your mind the most peaceful resolution and outcome and transition possible on January 20th. And that we rally around that, right? And that we rally also, as I was saying, to tie it all together, around the acknowledgement and the paying forward of the idea that we really need to give our friends, neighbors, relatives, and fellow human beings over there in that demographic that have been under the influence of that complex, compounded set of ideologies that is GOP-ism and Trumpism, kind of burdened on top. Because as you'll note, if you look around, both at a sort of prominent public service level and at a sort of local community level, people are walking away from Trump and from the GOP. And it isn't about just celebrating that and hoping for the destruction of the political party and letting things just roll otherwise as they were. As I've been wanting to talk about in a sort of special segment or special, little mini episode, I think the calling, specifically here in this chapter of history for this country, and then similarly at a global level, there is a sort of epic calling to help bring about an American catharsis, a healing emotional release and journey process. And in spiritual communities, there's a lot of talk about that in general and in specific, under certain circumstances and contexts. And I'm sure there's plenty of other people out there who think of their national experience, their experience as members of the national experiment that is this federalist union of 50 little states that might as well have been countries. We can remember that we really truly are in on all of this together at a county by county, state by state, nation by nation, and ultimately species-wide level. As I've noted in the past, it's quite kind of fun and exciting to know that this show is listened to kind of in a pretty broad spectrum international level, even if it isn't millions of people just yet. And I posit that whatever spiritual thing I say about this I generally think that in some way, obviously with adjustments for the specific needs of other countries, some kind of similar calling is out there for everybody in their own context. We must, at a personal level, at a community level, at a regional level, at a civic level, in all the different tiers, however they might be organized, to the national level, and then get to the place where we can return to an international discourse that's no longer bogged down and mired in the nonsensical distractionary tactics that have been imposed and or that politics has been burdened by. But I digress. I have been rambling long enough, dear friends and listeners. On a programming note, for those who are curious and or interested, this new experimental pilot little project that I'm working on is daunting. It is on the time-consuming side in a way that I kind of expected, but I'm also finding I don't know if it'll get better, so I'm a little worried that it's going to turn out to be my conclusion that it's too time-consuming. But like I think I mentioned this earlier today, and I apologize for being redundant. Hopefully, 1 or 2 examples of it will drop this week. If not this week, then hopefully by the beginnings of next week. But I'll leave it as a sliding scale thing. And hopefully, with your support, it won't be something that falls off the table. Send me some love and energy, folks, to be fully animated and motivated to work through this. And otherwise, I will continue to do the show as you know it now. And with one adjustment, I wanted to drop this. I don't think I've already redundantly brought this up today. I flirted with this before and experimented in previous episodes way back in the day. But I'm going to reintroduce and reincorporate musical selections from the delightful. And if you've never been there and you're a musician and or a band, take note. You should go check them out. Maybe get involved, get some sample music on the platform, and broaden your audience network. But freemusicarchive.org, a really awesomely well operated thing. There's some new. I think I've talked about this on the show recently, but I've been thinking about it, contemplating it. I can say a lot of great things about the website and the service as I knew it before, and I'm probably will bring up new cool things about it as it exists now because there's been some changes. But the point here is I'm going to start mixing in new artists and other music from freemusicarchive.org because some improvements to the search engine there have made it very simple and clean for me to be able to find music tracks that work on this podcast and are the appropriate licensing, etc., and that I can use for free. So if you are a fellow creative and you've been like, where do I find halfway decent music that is oftentimes actually kind of exactly what I want and even inspiring? Because mind you, there's music of all types there and of all ranges, and arguably some may judge it negatively, but make sure to inform yourself about the different licenses and make sure that you know how to sort your search results to the appropriate license type so you don't put music into any of your projects in the wrong way and, create problems for your project in the future in terms of having to redo it or pull it or whatever. At any rate, as I have said before, it's an honest endorsement. Love that show. Love that website. Not that show. Love that website. I've loved previous musicians I've featured on the show here. I'm going to try to reincorporate that and make my show sound a little bit more like what I mean by talk radio. For those of you who've seen the film, I'm kind of inspired a little bit by Robin Williams in Good Morning Vietnam. I can't deny it. But anyways, I've rambled on way too much. As always, friends, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for coming on down to my social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And of course, if you know of a cool and new up-and-coming social media platform that I should be on, let me know. And of course, there's always Sprecher.com. Come on down, sign up, show your support for the show, leave your comments, be part of the community and the conversation. All right, I'm going to turn to you, DJ Zed. Play us out with a little dubstep. Remix Executive Chill from End Times from created by DJ Zed on the Remix Live app. Remember, folks, the solution is healing. The real revolution is deep within. And the calling requires compassion and forgiveness. Don't be lured over there towards the hater's side, towards violence and division. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your hearts. The Matrix is real. It's just probably not what you might think it is. More on that in a future episode.